Tonight on KQED Newsroom, a startling op-ed from inside the Trump administration, and contentious hearings for Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh. Also, San Francisco is pushing for a controversial approach to the opioid crisis, plus a new ad campaign reignites a debate over politics and sports. Hello and welcome to KQED Newsroom. I'm Scott Schaefer, in for Thuy Vu. We begin with politics. President Trump's pick for the Supreme Court, Brett Kavanaugh, faced 3 days of intense and often contentious questions this week on Capitol Hill. At stake are Kavanaugh's views on abortion rights, gun control, and whether presidents can be protected from prosecution while in office. Meanwhile, an explosive op-ed by an unnamed senior official in the Trump administration claims the president's own staff have been trying to stop him from acting in, quote, a manner that is detrimental to the health of our republic. To discuss all of this and more, I'm joined by KQED politics and government reporter Marisa Lagos, UC Hastings professor of law Rory and political strategist Sean Walsh with Wilson Walsh Consulting. Well, folks, kind of ran out of superlatives this week, but let's begin with that op-ed piece. Sean, the author of it, saying that the president is anti-democratic, amoral, erratic. Should we be reassured or scared to death having read that?
Well, I guess the bottom line is if you're concerned about the president, there are people in there that are trying to drive the administration one way or another. With regards to broader-based policy issues, I think it was a little bit of fear tactics. I mean, you've got General Mattis at DOD, you've got Pompeo at State, where the government is being well run. I just think this was one person who had an axe to grind and at some juncture wants to be the deep throat that comes out 10 or 20 years from now, and I was the guy or gal.
But yeah, Marisa?
I just wonder if it was one person or if this was a concerted effort. I mean, we've heard these rumors. The Bob Woodward book came out. A lot of the things that were in that really paralleled with what we saw in this op-ed. I mean, I find it a bit ironic. If you're worried about somebody being unstable and feeling like they're being undermined, is putting this out in a national newspaper the best way to sort of stabilize the White House?
It's not.
It's not.
Throwing gasoline on a fire.
It's throwing gasoline on a fire, and it did seem a bit self-serving, sort of like, you know, don't worry, there's adults in the room, so trust us, it's all going to be okay. Well, if it's that bad, why aren't you standing up and saying, I'm out of here?
I think this person, though, is a hero in some sense. This is not somebody who wants to lose their job. They are trying to do the right thing for the country. They're not running the country. They are just exerting whatever influence they have. And they had the guts. They're probably going to lose their job. Sooner or later, they're going to identify them. And why don't they quit? Because somebody else will be put in place who will be worse.
What, you know, what the president, of course, is calling this treason and cowardice and all kinds of things. Is this a patriotic thing to do?
Well, there is a certain level of cowardice. Look, I've served for 2 presidents and 2 governors. If you've got a problem and you don't like the policies that you're doing, you can put your papers in and resign. So I guess you could say that theoretically, if you think the country's in that much peril and you have the hubris that you are the one person that's going to save the day.
Although it sounds like there are multiple people involved, because it says many of us.
Well, so many of us. So you sit around the coffee table and you see, oh God, this tweet just came out today, and then you have a kibitz in the old executive office building coffee shop.
But this is a continuing narrative throughout this presidency. I mean, this is not something that is that shocking, right? Because we've been hearing these stories, and again, the Woodward book explores a lot of them, but I think these are, you know, stories that have been dripping out for months and months. And so, of course, it's clearly somebody who's not happy with these things. I mean, I think to Rory's point, it's interesting because what I haven't seen are the people who actually do leave the administration speaking out either. And so at that point,
They've
you
all
kind
had
of
to
wonder.
sign their agreements.
So let me tell you who's really not happy. The leaders in the Republican caucuses in the House and the Senate. So the unemployment numbers came out today, another 200,000 jobs added, African-American and Latino unemployment numbers at record lows. The economy is zooming along and people are feeling really good. And yet you've got an election that's coming right around the corner and you may stem the tide, but yet you get this kind of noise in the background.
You've worked in administrations, you worked in the White House. What is something like this, although it's unprecedented, but what do you imagine something like this doing to morale in the White House?
I think morale is terrible because now you've got the president yelling and screaming, let's find who he or she is. And you don't want a jihad going through every office, who leaked what and when. And I'll tell you something, being in a White House, people leak all the time, but they leak for policy goals and objectives. And do you want to get caught up in who's the leaker game? You don't want people coming to your office and grilling you. It's a terrible, terrible morale.
There was also the Woodward book, which came out kind of more of the same in a way. Does it strike you as odd at all that it came out in a week that these confirmation hearings are
I thought
happening?
the anonymous editorial was written by Woodward, wasn't it? I mean, it is, I don't think, a coincidence. This is someone who I think was probably sourced. There was an intermediary, someone sourced maybe through Woodward, saying similar things. And it seems to me advancing the sales of that book, I'm a little cynical about that.
Interesting. It's a parlor game in D.C. as to who might have written this. Sean, have you heard anything, seen anything, read anything that you think makes you focus on one person in particular?
My belief, it came from the office of the vice president, either from the senior speechwriter or another speechwriter or somebody in their communications. The way it was written, the way it was laid out, the fact that they touched parts of the elephant, the tail or the trunk, but not all the administration stuff. So someone who was close. The question is, what is a senior official? That's kind of the,
you could be a senior,
yeah, a senior official.
Did it seem like somebody, it seemed to me like somebody who was maybe their portfolio included national security, foreign affairs?
Well, if you're a speechwriter for the vice president, you cover foreign affairs as well as domestic policy issues as well. So that's my gut. I don't want to cast any aspersions on these poor folks, but if I had to pick it today, that's where I think I would.
And my bet is we will find out eventually, right? I mean, every reporter in D.C., let alone the president's staff, is looking for who this person is.
Well, and my thinking is if it is the vice president, it could be a way if things crash and Trump
I don't think it's
leaves,
the vice president.
You don't
really
think he would? Really?
I don't think he had any knowledge if it came from that office. I just think this is somebody who opportunistically decided that we could make some efforts there. And by the way, I could be the president's speechwriter, not the vice president's speechwriter.
All right, well, let's move on because there are some substantive things happening in D.C., the Kavanaugh hearings. Rory, what do we learn about this nominee that we didn't know at the beginning of the week?
You know, I'm really not sure we know anything that we didn't know before. Maybe some of our suspicions were confirmed. I think everybody believes that he is hostile to Roe versus Wade, and I think perhaps that was confirmed by some of these documents. We learned more about the process and the broken down nature of this process. The fact that 2.5 years of documents while he is serving the president in a pretty close position are not revealed even one page. The idea that the National Archives was kept out of the process and that it was accelerated so that a private attorney is doing the marketing.
And it makes you think that they're hiding something, and yet several of these emails were released. There's one on racial profiling, I think maybe another one on Roe, that really was more smoke than fire, I think.
Look, this was a foregone conclusion. He, as we've talked about on the show before, was going to be confirmed going into this and is going to be confirmed now. The only thing that would have derailed it is if something explosive happened. Mr. Booker tried a campaign, I am Spartacus, and Kamala Harris tried her thing, but there was nothing to derail it. So he will be confirmed. The only question now is how many Democrats come across the aisle to vote for his confirmation.
But let's talk about process. Regardless of where you sit politically, I think that we can all agree that this is a very serious matter, a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court. And I do think that there are valid questions now, how they were raised and what we would have found out. Maybe nothing, maybe it wouldn't have changed anything. But I think there is a valid argument that the American people should have a good sense of who a nominee is, especially given that he has come from a different background in the sense that he did work for the Bush White House in a very partisan manner.
You're saying they should have released more documents?
I mean, I think that there's an argument for that.
There were also very substantive discussions that were had about presidential power. There were views that were conveyed to him from senators. I thought Senator Booker did a very good job of saying, well, you wouldn't fire somebody because they were black. You wouldn't fire someone because of their gender. And then he said, and you wouldn't fire anyone because of their sexual orientation, would you? And Kavanaugh, I thought, paused and said, he was thinking internally, boy, maybe not.
Well, and that's an issue that could come up also.
Right.
Yes.
Employment.
Yes.
We mentioned our two senators, Dianne Feinstein, of course, the ranking member of the committee, Kamala Harris, a relatively new member, thought to be running for president in 2020. What did you think of their styles? I mean, obviously, Harris was the prosecutor this week.
They were both running for president. I mean,
both Dianne Feinstein?
Booker and
okay. Yeah.
And Kamala Harris. So Booker's bumper sticker is I am Spartacus, okay? Kamala Harris, I've got 53 communists in my pocket. Who in the law firm did you talk to? Why don't you just say, hey, did you talk to Joe Smith or did you talk to Susie, Q in that law firm? It was all theater. And, you know, the complaints of, gosh, we need more documents, they went in there saying we're not going to vote for this guy. So why do you need any more documents? You've made up your mind.
It did seem to me, though, that she asked questions that perhaps he hadn't been prepared to answer. The question about, can you think of a law that restricts in any way men's reproductive rights, for example?
Or, yeah, medical procedure. I mean, I think this was typical sort of to their styles, right? Kamala Harris has come in hot and heavy. She is a more progressive rising star. She wants to sort of burnish those credentials. She was very prosecutorial, and I think she brought that kind of cross-examination to hers. Dianne Feinstein is much more about decorum and sort of the old school nature of Washington. She's sitting next to the senator or the chairman because she's the ranking member. I think they have a relationship, and she is trying to maintain that. You know, she got attacked by her opponent in that Senate race for her style, but I mean, no surprises. And I think that the bottom line is Kamala Harris may not have brought any independence to her side, but she certainly helped with her progressive
Well,
supporters.
they're both senators. I think we're the only state with 2 senators on that committee, and I think that they carried California well. I thought they represented well, and they actually provided a nice contrast. But as a duo,
What do you
I
think her
they're very
seniority?
effective.
What do you think her seniority got her this week?
You mean Feinstein?
Dianne Feinstein.
I think Feinstein's seniority is incredibly valuable. I mean, first of all, she does have the ability to speak to the chair of the committee and actually get him to pay attention a little bit. They discuss together, how do we handle all these unprecedented protesters in the back of the room? Her seniority, they are deferential to her. She does get to go first. She gets to make decisions on this document thing. At some point, they said, we're going to have new rules, and maybe the ranking member and the chair will formulate these rules. We're
almost out of time. Last question. Is there a better way to do this than it seems like these are theater, they're really highly scripted.
Well, I defer to my Eli friend here, but there were not hearings until the 20s when Justice Brandeis came forward. And he came up and said, they started to ask him questions. He says, you got my writings, didn't answer any questions. And Potter Stewart with civil rights, kind of the same thing. So this modern kind of theater thing is relatively new. And I think with the Bork hearings, it turned into a political theater and political spectacle. And this really was a spectacle.
Yeah.
I think it was embarrassing, to be honest with you.
Perhaps an argument for keeping cameras out of the courtroom.
Trial by ordeal.
Yeah, all right. Well, thanks very much, Rory Little, Sean Walsh, Marisa Lagos. Fascinating conversation. Crazy stuff going on. San Francisco could become the first U.S. city to facilitate the use of hard drugs like heroin under medical supervision. A bill passed by the California Legislature last week would allow the city to set up a 3-year pilot project of so-called safe injection sites. Supporters, including San Francisco Mayor London Breed, say it'll help reduce overdose deaths and get used syringes off the streets. But facilities like that are illegal under federal law. In a recent op-ed, Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein lashed out against the proposal. He threatened, quote, swift and aggressive action against their opening and said they would only worsen the opioid crisis. For more on this issue, I'm joined now by California State Senator Scott Wiener, the bill's co-author, and Dr. Scott Steiger, the Deputy Medical Director of the Opiate Treatment Outpatient Program at San Francisco General Hospital. Gentlemen, thanks for being here. Have to just acknowledge this is a very Scottish segment, I have to say. Let me begin with you, Senator Wiener. This bill, of course, is not a panacea for all the problems around opioid use, but what would you hope and expect it would accomplish?
Well, safe injection sites are a way of really applying a public health approach to injection drug use as opposed to criminalizing people who are addicted to drugs, and acknowledging that people are going to inject whether or not we have a safe injection site. So instead of having them inject on your front doorstep or in front of a neighborhood store or in a park, let's get them inside in a safe, healthy, clean environment where they can get access to recovery services and healthcare. And ultimately, we want to get them into recovery and healthcare services, get them healthy, and reduce the number of overdose deaths.
What would you add to that, Dr. Steiger?
Well, I would just add that it's not a new thing, right? There's over 120 sites like this around the world. It's just that the United States hasn't adopted it as a strategy for reducing morbidity and mortality from injection drug use. And the evidence is really strong from a public health and medical perspective that this is an appropriate intervention.
What do you mean it's strong? Like, what does it show?
Well, So I like to think about it as who should be in favor of these things. So if you're like me and you have patients and you treat people who have drug use problems, you like it because it actually gets people into treatment, as the senator mentioned. Moreover, it reduces the risk of contracting HIV or hepatitis C, and it keeps people alive a little bit longer, so reduces overdose deaths in the area of the facility.
Is it good policy, though, to allow somebody to shoot up in a safe environment and then let them out onto the streets?
Yeah, so the structure of these things is actually such that people get to hang out after they use and have some period of monitoring by their peers and by other people that are there. If they have a bad reaction to the drug that they use, they will be able to be taken care of and swiftly dealt with in a medical fashion if necessary. It's not something that ends up with people who are then intoxicated in such a way that they won't be able to care for themselves on the street.
Scott Wiener, as an elected official, I think you can appreciate this. If somebody leaves one of these facilities, goes out and commits a crime, is the city liable?
No, I don't believe so. And just to be clear, if someone is going to get high and then commit a crime afterwards, they're going to do it whether or not they're in a safe injection site. They're going to either shoot up on the street or shoot up inside. And if they're shooting up in one of these centers, I think they're going to be more likely to be stable and not do problematic things afterwards.
This bill only covers San Francisco. It would allow the county, city and county, to set up this pilot project. Were there other counties that wanted to be part of this?
The original bill, this bill has been around for a few years. It started out giving every county in the state the option, and then it was limited to, I believe, 7 or 8 counties. But in the end, San Francisco is the only county that is prepared right now to move forward. I think Los Angeles is probably the next closest.
When you say prepared, do you mean politically or what?
Politically and operationally. And in the end, we wanted to get a bill passed so that we could do a pilot in California, the first one in the U.S., show that the sky doesn't fall, that it can be successful, and it can then be a model. And I think my colleagues agreed that allowing San Francisco to try it, because we like to try new things here that everyone else then usually models years down the road, that it's a good idea to let us try it out here.
And Dr. Steger, is there money for education, for treatment in this bill, or are you just hoping that once they're in this facility that you can then get to them with outreach workers?
Yeah, there's not money designed for that in the bill, but we already have in San Francisco a huge network of harm reduction teams working with people who use drugs that are unstably housed. And so we already have the people and the know-how to do this right. And it's just a matter of having sort of legal protection to make it so that people will actually be able to implement it.
And Senator Wiener, the governor, of course, hasn't decided what he's going to do. What do you think his concerns are?
Well, I don't want to speak for the governor. What I will say is that the governor has actually spoken to me about his concerns about open-air injection drug use in San Francisco. It is something that he's expressed concern to me about.
In the context of this bill?
No, just in talking to him in general. When I talk to him, sometimes we talk about San Francisco. He was born here and spent part of his youth here, so he cares about the city. But this governor has been a very public health-oriented governor. He has really signed some progressive, forward-looking bills from the public health community. So I think he'll have an open mind to it.
To what extent do you think he would be concerned about this threat from the Deputy Attorney General that the feds could come down, we could have another kind of sanctuary city situation where federal funding could be threatened?
Oh, I'm sure he'll take that into account, but this is also the governor who he's used to threats from Donald Trump and his cronies. That they threatened us over our immigration protection law, and the governor signed it anyway, and we beat them, and we will beat them when they try to come after us. They are going after our auto emission standards. They go after us all the time. So I don't think Jerry Brown is going to be spooked because Rod Rosenstein publishes what can only be characterized as an ignorant op-ed full of falsehoods in the New York Times.
And Dr. Steger, if this bill is signed and becomes law, what would be your hope, and how will you be assessing whether or not it's working?
Great question. A couple things. One would be we get to open multiple sites, because the truth is that people who are unstably housed, desperate to use drugs, aren't going to travel across town to use one of these facilities. And so my hope would be we would open multiple sites. And my hope would be that people in the community notice fewer syringes on the street, less examples of people injecting in front of them on the street, and we get more people into treatment. So those are metrics we can actually track, and I would expect within a relatively short amount of time we'd be able to see those improvements.
All right, and we'll know by the end of September whether or not the governor signs this. Senator Scott Wiener and Dr. Scott Steiger, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Turning now to sports. This week, Nike released a new ad campaign that reignited debate over the role of politics in sports. The ad features former 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick and reads, "Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything." Kaepernick triggered a furious backlash from Donald Trump and others in 2016 when he refused to stand during the national anthem. Kaepernick said he was raising awareness of police violence against African Americans. While many supported Kaepernick, others saw it as unpatriotic. Not surprisingly, the response to the campaign has also been polarized. Joining me now to discuss this and more, just as the NFL season kicks off, is San Francisco Chronicle sports columnist Ann Killian. Ann, welcome.
Thank you.
So this ad, very controversial, a lot of attention. Gutsy move on the part of Nike?
Well, a multi-billion-dollar company doesn't do gutsy moves just out of the goodness of their heart. So I think Nike has long had an edge in their advertising. They were criticized back in the day for backing Michael Jordan and making him a prominent face of their campaign because that was an unusual thing for an African-American athlete, which, you know, it's hard for us to imagine that now. But they've always kind of liked that edge.
Pushed the envelope a little
bit. So this is in keeping with them. And I think, you know, they obviously spent probably months and months analyzing it, breaking everything down in terms of what the financials were, what the market segment was. And I think that they realized that the demographic that they really want to sell their shoes to, the young demographic, the ones that buy multiple pairs of shoes and all the time and for all sorts of different sports, they are going to appreciate this.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe the other demographic that is going to hate it,
they're not going to get them anyway.
Maybe they're not going to get them, or they're not a huge part of their segment, market segment anyway.
I want to go back to the ad real for a minute because it doesn't show anything about Colin Kaepernick kneeling. I mean, there's nothing controversial in the ad itself.
No, the ad is very inspiring. It's all athletes that we care about. And
yeah, exactly. So let's take a quick look.
Believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. When they talk about the greatest team in the history of the sport, make sure it's your team. And if you're a girl from Compton, don't just become a tennis player. Become the greatest athlete ever. So don't ask if your dreams are crazy. Ask if they're crazy enough.
So, Ann Killian, that ad played on last night's season opener against the Atlanta Falcons versus Philadelphia. Any sense of how the NFL is reacting to this?
They haven't said, and that's a really interesting thing because they are in business with Nike. Nike is their official uniform creator. Almost all their cleats, I think players have some discretion over what cleats they use, but most of them are Nikes. There's a swoosh on pretty much everything you see related to the NFL. Yet Colin Kaepernick has filed a grievance, and his lawsuit was just allowed to go forward. The NFL lost an early round with an arbitrator. So it's a very complicated thing, and I'm sure that Nike would have had to have said to them, look, we're going to do this. And the NFL probably isn't crazy about it, but
would have been worse to try to stop it. Probably.
But right, I mean, the NFL has made a lot of missteps on this whole issue from the very beginning, and so I think probably they avoided a misstep by trying to block anything.
So the NFL season's underway. 49ers play the Vikings this weekend. Jimmy Garoppolo, the quarterback phenomenon who did so well at the end of last season. Excuse me. Are the expectations for what he can do for this team too high, do you think?
Yeah.
Unrealistic.
That's kind of the way the 49er fan base operates. Most NFL fan bases, you know, they've been very hungry for a long time to have a savior type quarterback. Colin Kaepernick at one point was supposed to be it, and that didn't happen. And I think that there's just so much excitement because after a couple of some of the worst years a team could ever have, it feels like they're on the right track. And it's not just Garoppolo, but obviously he came in and wowed people, and he's got the look. He tutored under Tom Brady. He's kind of looks like the whole package.
Good pedigree.
Well, yeah, we'll have to see. But he also, they appear to have a very smart young coach in Kyle Shanahan, an adult in the room in John Lynch as the general manager. And so there's a very good feeling about this team overall. Now, they haven't had a winning season since they've moved to Levi's, so we'll have to see.
Yeah. Across the bay, the Raiders, different story perhaps. This is their last season in Oakland.
Maybe.
Perhaps. And they of course, traded their elite pass rusher,
yes,
Khalil Mack. And you wrote this week that makes it more palatable for them to leave the city. Do you think the fans feel that way?
I think so. I think a lot of people are just kind of done with them. I mean, certainly there are the diehard fans. There are people who will buy season tickets in Las Vegas. But I think that they made it very clear by trading one of the elite players in the league, who didn't need to be traded, by the way. He was still under contract for another year. They made it clear that winning this year in Oakland is not a priority. And I think a lot of fans had hoped with the arrival of John Gruden that maybe they would have a chance to win and maybe win it all in this one last final season in Oakland. That appears to not be on the table anymore. Staying
in Oakland, to wrap up here, the Oakland A's are red hot.
Yes, they are.
They just took 2 or 3 from the Yankees, who they may be facing in the playoffs. What accounts for their success?
They are young, they're talented. A lot of these guys came up through their system and really want to be here. They're not stopgap kind of players. They have a really good manager in Bob Melvin who just has set the right tone. And I think because they're in Oakland, because they have, such a lousy stadium and they aren't expected to do anything, they're just playing free. And they don't have this enormous payroll. They don't come in with all these expectations. And you see them start taking down teams like the Astros and the Yankees. And it's like, oh, you know what? Maybe they can make some noise in the postseason.
And they've overcome a lot of adversity, a lot of injuries.
Oh, a lot of injury. They basically don't have a starting rotation right now, which could be tough in October, but it makes it really interesting right now.
Yeah, and the fans are certainly paying attention, which is great for the city.
Yeah.
Ann Killian, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for us. As always, you can find more of our coverage at kqed.org/newsroom. I'm Scott Schaefer in for Tui Vu. Thanks for joining us.